The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It is Brian and Miss Berlin for Breaking Down Security.
Hey, how's it going?
It's not too bad. We're here on a lovely Friday and recording. So for those of you who listen to us regularly, you know that we're not prone to do sponsored podcasts. We did a couple last year with Illumio on Zero Trust. And we've been approached by another company. Company you may never have heard of. It's pretty much a shadow startup. I don't think we've ever mentioned it on the show before.
Nope.
Name of Blumira. And Ms. Berlin, do you know anything about this company?
Just that they're amazing.
Wow, I was not aware of that.
How have you not heard of them? I just don't know.
They're just Well,
all over TikTok. It's
all the TikToks.
Yeah.
Ticking to the talking. So, so for those of you who are not in on the joke and are new to the show, Ms. Berlin does work for Blumira, and we've have been reached out to by her company, not her specifically, to maybe do some sponsored shows. So we are going to do a series of 3 shows like we did with Illumio on various facets of Blumira and talking about some of their product offerings. And this week, so if you if you heard our Illumio ones, we tend to ask real questions and not it's like, oh, what is it like to be awesome at your company and whatever. We try to keep it very much like we do our normal podcast, where it's more of an interview format. We will ask some somewhat tough questions from our guest this week. And if you have any questions, we'll have some contact information at the end on how you can get a hold of these folks. So I'd like to welcome Patrick Garrity to the show. Patrick is the VP of Operations. He's had years of experience in the security industry, building and scaling usable security products. He currently leads Blumira's product, sales, and marketing teams. And prior to joining Blumira, led the sales engineering, product marketing, and international expansion for Duo Security. You can find him on Twitter at thisisnottap. So welcome, Patrick, to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's exciting to be on the show and talk about some of the things that people can consider from a SaaS software and security perspective. So thanks so much.
Very
it's exciting.
Cool. All right. So Ms. Berlin and I will be grilling you. She'll be doing it much nicer because obviously she works for you.
No, she's got to get
these are all the.
I love to be challenged. So
these are all the questions I can't answer during our company meeting, or I can't ask during the company. Right? Yeah. Like I can come at it from, and there's like I don't think I can get in trouble. Maybe I can. I don't know.
No. See, you're in the safe zone. You're in the safe tree.
Okay.
You're in the safe tree here with, under the shield of BreakSec anyway. But,
I probably should take off my Blumira shirt.
Right. Oh, crap. All right. Well, you broke the sanctity.
Dang it.
Yeah, damn it.
All
All
right.
right. So, Patrick, tell us what was the impetus for creating Blumira? Why is it
out
there, and how are you different from say your competitors
or every other?
Amanda needs that. I think this is great. I mean, first off, the reality is doing detection and response and security operations, everyone knows, is not easy. And historically, there's been a lot of complicated products in the space. And actually, one of the things that when I actually was considering coming to Blumira very early on, people were like, why would you want to go work for a company that plays in the security operations and SIEM space? Like, all the products suck, was generally the feedback. Mm-hmm. And that's actually like the same thing people said about two-factor like 8 years ago before I joined Duo. And so that actually is an indicator that it's actually a real problem, and it's not accessible to most organizations because of the complexity. And that's why we see so many small to medium-sized businesses just getting owned nonstop. Is the reality is they can't afford, nor do they have the skills to actually detect when something's wrong, right?
Right.
And so that's really the focus around Blumira is like, hey, someone with basic IT skills needs to be able to do the security person's job that they can't afford or they don't have, right? And how do you actually scale detection and response to organizations of any size? Democratizing security essentially is one of the biggest opportunities we're tackling right now.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, because if you think about, I mean, you mentioned how that's how people saw two-factor authentication way back when before do. Like, what was the only thing that people used? Just RSA tokens, right? I remember managing an RSA server and trying to delve out, a couple thousand tokens to doctors, and boy, was that a gigantic pain.
Yep. So you are a startup. You have successfully captured a Series A funding round. What was your selling point to the VC folks when you told them that? Were you telling them, "Oh, we're we're the Splunk killer, or we're doing all the silver bullets and the low hanging fruits"? What was your sales pitch to those groups to have them give you that money? Because I mean, it's no mean feat to get a series. Well, it may be actually. I've never been a VC angel, so you show me some pretty graphs and I'm going to throw money at you. Or what was the selling point there for getting that round of funding?
Oh, I think a combination. It wasn't completely my job. Like, that was a team effort, just to emphasize. But cool. Yeah, I think the aspect of the ability of what we bring to market and providing accessibility to an underserved market, but also when you do that, you can scale up into enterprise over time. And taking a much different approach, and then proven success behind being able to consistently grow revenue. And grow market. And so, yeah, from a investor perspective, we have a lot of great investors, both angels as well as venture capital. Like, their interest is like, we are extremely disruptive to a market that's incredibly fragmented, and frankly, a lot of organizations don't have accessible products, tools, or services today that they can afford. So it's a really, really big market as well, from a growth perspective.
Right.
What do you think? And I know what my answer would be, but you might have a different answer. What do you think would be one of the bigger things that this kind of software as a service addresses for not necessarily SMBs, but people with like semi to mid maturity security programs, right? Like,
that's a good question, because I hear the same thing over and over again, which is like, the product tool sets they're layering on, the complexity of them requires very deep skill sets like yourselves, right? And the challenge with that is, like, there's very few people from a market perspective, and the price of them has increased exponentially. And so I do think that, like, we find a lot of organizations where they implement an Elk stack or a Splunk stack, and they do it well, but the resource that initially did it ends up going to another company like Amazon. And then someone else inherits that and knows nothing about Elk stack and Splunk, right? And so what happens is then that deployment kind of collects logs, but there's too much noise and too much information. And it's not tweaked and tuned properly, and you don't get good, rich information. And then a security incident ends up happening, right? And so I think the aspect is like, by being a SaaS service and those components being managed by Blumira automatically and via our detection engineering teams, which Amanda's a part of, it actually allows them to get high fidelity threats that anyone with basic skills can go and be like, oh, this is a problem. Oh, and maybe I need some help. Which is a pretty big deal out there today, because the turnover in the security industry is extremely high. So I think there's a huge opportunity in the larger companies with the product that we have, as we continue to grow and mature.
Very nice. Okay. So maybe, okay. So you're mentioning a lot of small and medium-sized businesses because there's a price point there. Let's say I I have been a shop that's using, one of the large SIEM creation, this catalogs and logging of these things, or maybe I'm already using another SaaS platform. What would you tell them? We have 100,000 users and 200,000 endpoints and whatever. We can't just rip out what we have and put yours in. Help me, make this, because obviously this would be a cost saving measure potentially, or, you bring additional functionality, which we'll talk about later on. But how easy is it just to yank out the other stuff and put in the new stuff? I mean, are we going to have to worry about what are some of the hurdles that, companies like that have to deal with if, when they bring you on versus, what they used to have? And how do they get over that risk and fear?
I think first off, like most of our customers are greenfield. They never had a SIEM. They might not even know what a SIEM is. And I think that sounds shocking, but that's actually most of the market. Like only these larger customers with a higher level of sophistication or longer term compliance needs have adopted, SIEM, historically speaking. Okay. And so I think twofold, which is like, one is the aspect of people needing these capabilities, but don't know what they actually need. So a lot of times that's delivery via managed service providers, which is a big market for us. What I would say to the 100,000 person company is like, hey, we're not ready for you. Honestly, like we don't go after that size organization because that we do believe that there's strong value we can bring to them. Mm-hmm. But in developing products similar to Duo, if you start down market and you make it accessible to all, then you build advanced feature sets. And the things with large companies is they're like, well, I want customization. I want the ability to do anything with it. But the reality is that actually makes them architect this giant SIEM that nobody understands, and it's questionable what value they get out of it. Right. And we're like determined not to go down the same path of just building another Splunk or another Alien Vault or another SIEM product that has all the bells and whistles, but at the end of the day doesn't actually do anything without a lot of care and feeding, right? Okay. And so I'd say that's what we do really well is like we're very focused on actually building next generation technology opposed to like, hey, you already have this product and you want a new product that does the same exact thing. That logic doesn't translate well because you're going to get the same results. Right. And so that's kind of a core to product development with like how we built and scaled Duo, and then also how we're doing the same at Blumira as well now, which is really, really great.
Okay. So I would imagine there's some flexibility here. I don't know how it is with other SIEM products, but do you have a lock-in or ecosystem where it's like, our threat feeds or whatever are completely, proprietary to us, or do you embrace open standards? I mean, what does it look like if somebody was to come in and go, well, I don't want to use yours. I already have this threat intel from insert endpoint security company here. How are you customizable in that, or do you use open source intelligence tools or feeds, and do you allow that kind of expandability?
Yeah. So today, we're correlating, I think 17 or 20 different feeds that are already available. Like threat intelligence is actually incredibly accessible today, but most people don't know how to leverage and use it, is the reality. And so like I said, right, the customization piece of like, well, I want to bring my own threat intelligence. Like I want to do all these things. Well, that requires you to have dedicated resources to manage and figure out how to leverage and use it. And so we actually don't do it doesn't mean we're not going to add that functionality or do those things down the road. But the first thing we assume is like anybody we're working with doesn't actually know or doesn't have the time to do those things. And so we're essentially doing that on their behalf and then building automation so you can apply these threat feeds via an automatic block list on your firewall, and that's all done for you through Blumira. And so that's kind of the benefit and joy. The disadvantage there is for your heavy, sophisticated security folks that are like, I want to do everything ourselves. Our product isn't there yet, right? And so normally the feedback with them is like, well, but I want to do all these things on my own and I want to build all my own functionality SIEM-wise. And it's like, well, that's great. You should go grab Splunk. And we're very open to suggesting those things when we're not the right product. because we're focused on servicing and democratizing as a whole. And over time, more and more customization gets built in the product, so we can address those different personas as well. Amanda, you want to add anything there?
I think we're really lucky just because the other incident detection engineer we have came from state of Michigan, and he actually writes, that's called the DFIR report, and is really, really good at threat intel. So we actually incorporate some of his stuff, and we can add threat intel feeds on the back end by request, but it's never anything that's like, it's not user customizable yet, which we've not really had a whole from our current customers. Usually we get like detection requests that a lot of the times are already in our backlog. So if we get a request that's like, hey, this would be cool, I'm like, oh, that's already on our list, so we'll just bump it up in priority.
I think another big thing is like focus on persistence and like high value threats over like, let's just throw alerts over the walls, because that's what ends up happening is like, hey, I have this tool and now I choose to implement these 3 rules. Suddenly now it's like, well, I get every time someone's password fails, I get a notification. That's useless, right? Yeah. But it just creates noise that ends up resulting in, now I just ignore these systems. And so that's a big part of like the curation and detection engineering team is actually curating threat for the organization, so they don't have to do that themselves. And I will say, from a SaaS provider perspective, like when you look at the major, the major vulnerabilities this year, like the Office 365 one, or I'm sorry, the Exchange one, or the Print Nightmare, the joy is our customer base has had no idea what to do, and they're like, what do I do? Well, our detection engineering team and our security teams are already looking in and going, okay, these are the indicators of compromise. Let's just put them on our platform. And the next thing you know, every single customer now has intelligence, and we know what customers are impacted, and go as far as to like reaching out to them and being like, hey, we're calling you because this is like way more important than just an alert, even though we sent you an alert, like right. You're going to get owned. And so that's, kind of the joy of the approach that we take is being able to scale that out across the masses for really an organization of any size and any skill level, which is great.
And cool. What I really like about the size and stuff that we're going for now is like with Print Nightmare, we can actually reach out to the customers and directly and be like, hey, this config file that you're using or this GPO that you're using doesn't actually log what we need, because that's 90% of the problems with detection. Like you're not logging what you need on the endpoints that you have, right? Either because of licensing or configuration. But it's nice to be able to reach out to them and be like, hey, you need this, otherwise we're not going to be able to detect these things.
It's funny. You and I, Ms. Berlin, know a friend who has a piece of software that does configuration of endpoint logging. Interesting.
They should be a sponsor too.
Yeah, eventually. So you are a SaaS platform, which means you are in the cloud, and you said that a lot of these companies have not reached the maturity of needing a SIEM yet for log correlation or whatever. Maybe they've gotten into PCI or something, and their auditors like, no, you need to have something for that. Maybe they're a little leery of the cloud, if you will. How do you sell that in terms of? We've talked about some opportunity costs here, where you're doing pretty much a lot of the heavy lifting with regards to log analysis that maybe they don't know how to do or they don't have the time to do. If I'm engaging your company, I'm like, I'm worried about, you taking all of my logs and not storing them correctly. We have issues with, data sovereignty or items like that, or, performance type issues. Are we going to saturate our internet bandwidth? What can you tell them in terms of things like that, where it's like, we have 150,000 endpoints and we're using a VPN full tunnel, and, pushing these logs are going to drown our VPN. How can you help them feel a little better about doing so?
Yeah, I think a few things, which is, first off, it's like, you know, you don't get the cloud objection much anymore like you used to, right? 8 years ago at Duo, that we were the first cloud service people considered. So, you know, most of our customers are adopting some form of cloud, whether it's O365, Azure, AWS, other services, right? What they want to make sure of is, you know, do you take and meet some of the common controls and standards from a security perspective and implementing best controls. I mean, the nice thing is like, well, we do follow compliance frameworks, but I'm not going to say that means you're secure. The other thing is we have, like, our company's background is in security. So we have security folks building this as well. So, you know, not only are best practices met, they're a lot of times exceeded in a lot of ways, which compensating controls are often much more secure than actually compliance controls, right? Is one thing to think about there often, because it's like people ask, do you do this thing? No, we don't. We actually do this, and it's better. And so I think there's, you know, misconception there, but pretty simply put, people are just like, I'm okay with shipping logs for the most part. The data bandwidth stuff isn't an issue much of anymore. I mean, bandwidth has become so available, rarely see that as an objection of reason not to move forward. Maybe some very niche instances, but relatively speaking, bandwidth has become really cheap. So that's not much of an objection. You know, from my perspective, more or less, it's them understanding how important it is to get base level detection and response capabilities in place.
Okay.
Is what you find. So like when you look at these cities and these counties, and when I'm talking about small to medium sized business, we're talking organizations between, I'd say, like 100 to 2,500 employees. And in some cases 10,000, where they're still identifying, hey, yeah, maybe we should do something about security. I think in the past year to 2 years, every organization is realizing like, oh, this isn't really an option anymore. So that's changing. But there still is a lot of, hey, I could do nothing. And you know, that's an approach people can take. And all too often, I think over the last 10 years, that's where most of incidences and breaches end up occurring, is people not implementing basic security controls. And so I think not only like us being a SaaS service, but as a whole, a lot of times implementing SaaS for like Office 365 is likely a much more secure option than having Exchange on premise, right? Because like Microsoft is managing updates, they're implementing stronger security controls, they're doing all this for you. And the reality is you take that in-house, now you have responsibility and ownership over that. And most organizations just don't have the team or resources, unless they're a tech company or a larger organization, to actually do those things. And so that's where it makes a lot of sense to adopt more and more SaaS cloud services, and especially when we're talking about security, because then you can correlate and do stuff in a much faster manner with the resources that you have.
Okay. So Ms. Berlin, earlier you had mentioned that you can actually tell when a host or when a company does not have their systems correctly configured. How do you do that? What does that look like? Is there a specific fingerprint where you're like, oh yeah, they're logging this, or they're sending us this, and we know that that's trash, and if it was properly logged, we wouldn't be seeing these specific event codes or something? Is there a specific way you're doing it, or is it just by feel?
It's just more of lack of something, right? Like,
okay.
We're not getting event ID 4103 from these customers, and we need that for these detections. Or like we have a really customized version of NXLog that when we talked to NXLog, they said that it was the most comprehensive or the longest NXLog config file that they've ever seen.
Right.
Which I took as a compliment.
To layer on that a little bit is like, we also take a people-centric approach. Is like, yeah, we're a SaaS product, but we have a dedicated, technical account management team that actually meets with customers on a monthly basis, and we'll do an audit to say like, oh, hey, have you enabled Sysmon? Like, that's a free tool from Microsoft, and it's going to help us provide much better level of detection. What vendors are doing that out there today in the SIEM space? Or, hey, you're not logging these event IDs, implement this via your GPO, and now we'll get better detection. And it doesn't take much time. Like in reality, that's having a 15 to 30 minute conversation on a monthly basis with your customers. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the reality, is like most of these organizations are too busy focused on, hey, how do I scale revenue? And that's solely it. When in reality, it's like, well, you take care of the customers and you make sure they're secure, and you go a little bit extra mile, it pays off so much more. And it's kind of the same, not only with customers, but then managed service providers. And managed service providers, it scales better because now they can impact even more customers. So we can train them a little bit on like, well, hey, these organizations don't have these things implemented. Let's go make sure it gets implemented. And frankly, Windows is probably like the number one, as we all know, Microsoft environments. Like there's just so much always going on that it's going to get overlooked sooner or later, really the basics. Right. So.
Right. Okay. So that sounds awesome. What are the other things I wanted to discuss? We have about 15 minutes or so left here. I wanted to ask about one of the topics that is near and dear to your heart, and you were talking about limiting attack surface. Now, there's been a lot of work in that space. I think the MITRE ATT&CK framework, where they're showing you different attack surfaces. There's also the Defend, which just came up, which is people are still trying to figure out how to make that work. That isn't just a selling tool for security companies. But when you talk about limiting attack surface, do you just mean, well, we don't have to give everybody laptops, or we don't have to give everybody email, or they don't all need VPN access? What does it mean to you when you try to talk about limiting attack surface?
Yeah, I kind of look at it and it's like, well, first, can I be mindful of my attack surface, of what it actually looks like, and what an attacker sees, and so the reality is like over the last couple of years, we've had many different tools. You have like Shodan, Census. You can find any information you want in a second. And so like, I don't even think a lot of organizations take the time to see what their organization looks like from external. And it's pretty simple. Like you can just go to Census and type in some IP addresses or host names and you'll get a look. But the amount of times open ports, like RDP, SSH, like, yeah, these things should be secure. And you take it a step further, it's like, well, how do we make sure we get as close to HTTPS secure access only, right? And then we're implementing additional controls like two-factor. I would consider be an attack surface control, actually, from a user perspective. And so all too often those basic fundamentals get overlooked. And so the more and more you can remove, and there's some great tools like Zscaler, right? Where now you're going through a proxy. I think Duo has the Duo Network Gateway, which is similar, but it's essentially providing access to the services that are needed, opposed to logging into one thing with a username and password and having access to the whole network. And so, yeah, wherever possible, right? It's how do I reduce that attack surface? And SaaS services are actually a great way to reduce attack surface, because normally it's like, well, I'm accessing via web browser and then I implement my identity controls and you're pretty much good. I mean, once you go to cloud infrastructure, it's more complicated than that, because then you start introducing connectivity of other things. But that's really like where I think a lot of organizations overlook. And frankly, they're not monitoring for changes. And so like some of the things at Blumira we do is like, oh, let's monitor Windows hosts to see for external connections all of a sudden via RDP, or a Linux host, right? Because those are good indicators that somebody's doing something they shouldn't. And sometimes, more than often the case, the person's like, oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to have RDP on the internet. And I know that's a little bit of shock sometimes when we're talking to security people, but it's an all too common reality. Like we do free trials, and I would say like probably 1 out of 5 free trials has RDP or SSH on the internet. And we all know that shouldn't be the case, right? And so that's what I mean by like doing some basics and looking at attack surface, because there's still a lot of education to be done there that people just are unaware of.
Right.
And we've had customers they like, you have a third party doing your firewall management, or just like not great change control or something that like won't go through security, and somebody accidentally opens the port to the internet and no one knows.
Any rule?
Yeah, well, because it was off before, right? They did an audit, it was off, right. And now some random change happened that they weren't aware of.
I've seen a customer go a month plus with any rule inbound, right? And it's just like, how is that possible, right? But it is the reality that like we're all human. We make misconfigurations, things get forgotten about. And so there is a huge need to look at those things from a consistent basis. Right. And that's some of what we're helping organizations do is identify that low-hanging fruit. When it is an issue.
So we're limiting attack surface, but you mentioned, Amanda, you mentioned, a third party managing your firewall. And then now a company is mature enough to know that they need log correlation, and then they engage yet another third party. So, I mean, there's, I don't want to treat this as a negative, but I mean, is there such a thing as limiting the attack surface, but opening yourself up to further attack by engaging too many third parties? Should you try to consolidate your third parties, not only just in terms of technology, but in terms of trying to reduce things like supply chain attacks? Because limiting your attack surface could open you up to supply chain attacks, which is you've got to find that happy medium, right?
Yep. No, I mean, the more vendors you're going to bring on, the more risk you're going to introduce for sure. I do think doing some level of due diligence on the vendors, right? Like track record, what their knowledge is from a security perspective. Are they aligned with any compliance frameworks at all? So there's some baseline of like, do you do anything for compliance? If the answer is no, then you should have concerns. And so you want them to at least say like, oh, we meet PCI, or we meet NIST 800-171, or we we follow this framework and we've been audited in some way and that's not always going to be the case. But if you have something sensitive you're putting in that service, you probably want to make sure that they at least have something. In regards to that, I do think it's unfortunate that like not all SaaS services are implementing base security controls by default. And that's the other thing you got to look out for is like, don't forget, like a lot of people are like, we got to do this migration Office 365. We're going to like disable all the security controls so it's really easy. And they never go back and implement security. So it just gets forgotten about. And so that's a lot of the challenge when we're talking about adopting new and additional services. You can't assume that even if they're compliant, you can't assume that the security controls that are available are implemented. Which is incredibly important to take those steps and take that seriously.
Okay. So as in terms of security controls, if somebody was to say, do you get penetration tested, or, what's your security posture yourselves? Because, you have to practice good security to give good security. So, what kind of controls do you have? I know you said you mentioned compliance controls, but those aren't security. What other things do you do? Or do you have multi-tenancy? Do you separate everyone's logs out? Do you abide by GDPR rules? I mean, do you have European customers where you have to worry about that? And I mean, there's other things too, like CCPA, where the new California privacy laws. I mean, are those those are all things that you're having to deal with and work with on a regular basis?
Some of them, yes, right. And so I think like approach from a security perspective, first off, is like, okay, what do we actually need to collect, right, from a customer perspective? And so like good thing is like we're storing logs, but we're not storing customer data, right? So logs can have some information that's useful for an attacker, but like we're not actually storing data in our service, right? And then the other thing right now is like you can actually extract the data out of the service, right? As far as like you have to have some level of control in. And so like everybody that accesses service is required to have multi-factor authentication, including the customers. And that's not an industry standard. Like most products, you have to implement that after the fact. And so, us taking those controls. And then the other thing, advantage of being a cloud first tech company. So we're hosted in GCP, right? is like we're containerized product and containerizing and isolating these different components of the service. And so it's actually a lot easier to do security than if like we built this ourselves on a bunch of Windows infrastructure, right? And so leveraging and looking at the different tools that we can use within those platforms as well from a security perspective. And there's probably more than that. Amanda, I don't know if you want to comment on anything else, but like high level, like that is one huge competitive advantage of tech companies that a lot of people don't realize is like they're actually adopting the latest and greatest and have access to better security controls in a lot of cases. Whereas organizations that aren't tech, first or cloud first, don't actually have access to the best tool sets necessarily to do that. So I think that's a pretty big thing to consider too from an advantage perspective. But yeah, we need to get Matt on the show if you want to talk deep on.
I know. Our CTO has his OSCP. So he's super smart. We probably could have him on, but he was also like one of the initial founders and lead developer. So he's got his stuff together. They do continuous security testing with stuff. Like I'm not a developer, so I can't remember what all that stuff's called.
Yeah, I think a combination, right, is like, well, if you're doing PCI, you have to do pen testing, right, in order to get certified. Right. So that's why I say it's like it's pretty good to get some level of industry standard something. But pen testing is good, but like that only goes so far.
Right.
We don't have infrastructure. Like we don't have standard infrastructure, right? Like
and so I would say like also some aspect of like how do you make sure your code is secure, things of that nature. Like good vendors are going to get either their CTO on a call or have documents that say, here's how we do these things. Like we have a ton of different documents under NDA that if someone wants to get in the details. I will tell you the other reality is like, do you know how many people ask about security?
Probably none.
I mean, probably 1 out of 100 will ask for security details. And the number one way to handle the objection, the founders are not from Duo, keep in mind. But it's like, a bunch of us are from Duo. Just trust us. And people are like, okay. And I don't.
Oh, that's terrible.
I think it's fair. Like, there's a lot of credibility in that. Like, a lot of people were at Duo and built that company. But it is, people are looking for some aspect of like, how do I trust this organization, this company? And so a good indicator is actually like, a bunch of people came from another reputable security company, right?
And you're not just randomly, just like some random startup.
And so
I'm here from the internet. So I come from the internet.
And same thing, like people trust Amanda. She's had a presence in the security community. And so I think like that there is value in that, mostly, SMB, mid-market, and then established relationships. But a lot of even building a company in the security industry is about building the trust and credibility, which is incredibly important. And then giving back from a community perspective, we do a lot of like responses to CVEs on here's what you should do and here's how you can take care of this for even customers that aren't ours, right? And so that becomes particularly important as well.
Right. Okay. We've got a few minutes here left. Who does your log correlation for your own company?
Us.
Me, of course. What do you think I test the detections on?
Well, okay.
Yeah, you gotta eat your own dog food. I mean, you gotta eat your own dog food for 100%.
Sure. Yeah. What's fun though is you can do like because I don't care about like in some cases I don't care about alert fatigue, right? Mm-hmm. Because usually the alert fatigue I'm getting is legitimately when I'm creating the detections. Right. We can't really do that for customers because you don't want to push out like some detections and like freak them out for a while. Right. So you can't really test on that. So it's nice to be able to test on our own data.
Right. So when you say pushing out alerts, is this an agent or an agentless type solution? Because I know a lot of organizations are like, yet another agent to put on a machine. So if it is an agent based, I apologize, but I mean, how do you reconcile that if it is an agent type system?
Not so I wouldn't consider it agent based. We do have NX log for collecting logs on Windows hosts, for example, which is very lightweight, and it basically just ships logs, right? So most people are fine with that for cloud services API connection, right? So and then right now we have a sensor that goes within the customer's environment for the collection. And that's just like an Ubuntu host that then, like a VM, right? That then ships the logs to us over HTTPS. But, pretty soon we'll have a cloud sensor. So anything API based will be direct to our service without any sensor required. And that's going to be available pretty soon. From a customer standpoint. So think of like O365, Azure, AWS, all that sort of stuff will be able to be plugged in directly to the Blumira service without any software at all required. Which is really, really good. So pretty minimal football. The other thing is like SIEMs require an ungodly amount of storage and compute.
I just asked Matt, our CTO, I'm like, hey, I'm on a podcast right now. How much data did we ingest just last month? And just raw, we about 400 terabytes in a month.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
So the ability to quickly scale, like on the data side, ingest all that and then store and retain it is a huge value to customers, because most of them are like, I don't have any additional storage, but I still need to retain this. And so it becomes a challenge of like with traditional products, now you're dealing with resource constraints.
Right.
And that's really not any fun, where it's like, well, yeah, our VM that you spin up forwards the logs immediately to us. So like it requires like 100 gig or 200 gigs worth of storage, maybe less than that even. And like a maybe 2 or 4 vCPU and a little bit of RAM. But it's been interesting. We've had scenarios where like our IOPS performance is like 5 to 10x what Splunk's maximum clusters can do. And we can actually manage those streams that are huge. So when we talk about enterprise, it's like, well, because everything's being forwarded and processed in somewhere like GCP, the competitive advantage long-term in enterprise is huge. If you look at the model in which it was built. And so I'm pretty excited as the company matures and grows to see how we adopt in the enterprise because of some of the underlying technology that Matt and the engineering teams have architected in.
That's cool. Okay. I got one last question, because there was something you brought up earlier about, Office 365 and using cloud-based environments. There's been a lot of discussion online that unless you're an E5 user, you're not going to get good logs from O365 and those areas. If you're if you're not an E5 user, how can you get good logs from, Blumira, so that Blumira can, do the analysis?
Well, I think there's a few. I think there's a few things, which is like there's actually multiple places to collect logs from. And yeah, like there's definitely going to be different verbosity as far as like the different additions. And I think this is somewhat flawed. Is like security shouldn't be a cost model with a SaaS vendor like this. However, Microsoft's in a unique spot, and so are other infrastructure platforms.
Right.
In this. And so I think that's what's kind of the challenge a bit. But I would say it's like, well, you should collect your O365 and your Azure AD logs to get pretty good coverage without E5. Would be, first recommendation. And then it's like, well, maybe you're not using Azure AD, maybe you're using Okta or other identity. Like identity is a key component there. That is probably more important than the verbosity. So it just depends on your maturity and what license level that you have. But I don't have a secret cheat code to implement. We should make a Game Shark for Office 365.
Oh my God. Everyone above a certain age knows exactly what Game Shark you're talking about, and everybody under 10's like, I don't know what the hell that is. So
man.
I may not know what that is.
I think I'm gonna link in that. That's the greatest idea ever. Game Shark awesome. For Office 365.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. I was just wondering about that because it's like, well, okay, we buy Blumira or any SIEM model, and then they'll come back and be like, well, you have to have E5 or something like that, and that's could be hugely expensive for that org, depending on if they don't price that correctly. So I'm glad that you're able to get actionable logs or use different organizational logs and system logs to be able to get that same visibility potentially without that. That may be another show where we can talk about, well, if you don't have E5, here's what you can get to make up for that delinquents.
Probably like, I mean, the more interesting things with Office 365 that I don't think require E5 is like rule creation. Like it depending on what size organization you are, but like, right. Oh, guess what? The number one thing is exfiltrating data and forwarding the emails when someone gives access so they can do a spear phishing attack, right? So if you look for that, and then also geo impossible, or if you're an organization that's only in the US or a certain country, just getting notifications when someone logs out from outside of that area, basically, gives you a leg on the attack. And so those are the types of things that I would look for specifically with O365 that, we've seen catch attackers pretty early on.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So Patrick, before we go, any last thoughts, anything you'd like to, give out to somebody who might be on the fence of buying Blumira and would, push them off that cliff in a good way?
Yeah, I would, first off, it's like we have free trial, try our product. We so often, people try our product and sometimes they're like, wait, why isn't anything happening? It's like, well, because there's not a threat in your environment, and we'll do some detection tests. But like, that's actually how detection should work, is it should tell you when things are wrong. But a combination of like detection testing or a lot of times, I'd say probably 50% of the time, we'll kick off some real threats or misconfigurations, and the customer's just like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this, and they buy the product, right? And so that's kind of the seeing is believing mentality. It's like check out Blumira, go to blumira.com, give our product a try. We have an awesome pre-sales engineering team and sales team that will help as well from an implementation perspective, but it only takes a couple hours and you're up and running.
All right. And apparently their senior detection engineers are okay.
They're all right.
They're okay.
We're looking for more
great.
Of them.
They're great.
By the way.
Blumira is hiring threat detection engineers.
We're hiring a crap ton of things.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. You can go to blumira.com, I guess, /careers or something like that. There's a careers link on the site if you're interested in going and working with Ms. Berlin or Mr. Garrity here. So cool. All right. Well, awesome. It was a pleasure having you on, Patrick. And, thank you for taking the time to talk to us here on Breaking Cloud Security.
Been great. My pleasure.